day before Thanksgiving in 1971, a man identifying himself as Dan Cooper bought a plane ticket from Portland to Seattle. He hijacked the plane, claiming he had a bomb in his briefcase, and demanded $200,000 and 4 parachutes. He jumped out of the plane with the money and the bomb somewhere over the Pacific Northwest, never to be seen again. The FBI claims to have investigated over 1,000 people, including dozens of deathbed confessions. In 2016, 45 years after the hijacking, the FBI suspended its investigation of the case. While the FBI is no longer looking for D.B. Cooper, there is a community of people who are trying to solve the case on their own. Welcome to the Cooper Vortex. In this episode, we're lucky to be joined by Rob Bertrand. Rob and his lovely wife own and operate the Northwest Escape Experience, where they have an amazing D.B. Cooper-themed escape room. Rob is deep in the Vortex, though. He's on the forums, he's consumed all the media on the topic, he's been to CooperCon, and he's got a really exciting new project in the works that I cannot wait for you to hear about. Ladies and gentlemen, my good friend Rob Bertrand. All right, Rob, how did you first hear about D.B. Cooper?
Well, I was born and raised in Portland, Oregon. And I think the first time I ever discovered D.B. Cooper was in a gossip magazine. My mom used to love those like tabloids you get at the grocery store in the checkout lane. There was one called World Weekly News. And so I was just thumbing through one of those because I always liked the crazy, weird stories. And that's where I discovered an article on Cooper. And it just really caught my attention because it happened in my hometown. And then, of course, unsolved mysteries. Everyone's my age got their start with Cooper in that very first unsolved mysteries, the two part with the Florence interview. It was so captivating, and of course, Robert Stack's voice, it just sinks into you.
Do you mind me asking how old you are, Rob?
I'm 44.
44, so you're 9
Mhm.
years older than me. So, because I watched that Unsolved Mysteries probably, in reruns when I was 5 years old or something.
Oh no, I saw it live the moment it aired, and it was just like, oh yeah, that story. And it just stuck with me ever since. I've always been fascinated by it, and I always seem to come back to it somehow.
Yeah, and it being a local story, I'm on the same page, is so much better because you're like, oh, I know that town. I know where that is.
Sure, I've been to that airport. I've stepped on that carpet.
And you eventually opened up your own business in Vancouver.
I did.
How soon did you think you wanted to incorporate DB Cooper into that?
I always knew that I wanted to do an escape room on DB Cooper. And so when we first decided to open an escape room business, we had two ideas. One was a horror themed fictional story, and the other was DB Cooper. And we decided to go with the horror theme first, simply based on the amount of space we had to tell the story. Because I had a vision of what I wanted that DB Cooper room to look like, and I just couldn't pull it off yet. So we waited, and I'm glad I did because the space we have now, it just works perfectly.
And you were kind enough to let me and my kids run through that during COVID. Who knows when you're listening to this, but not only was my family in Denver, Colorado, and Rob's in Vancouver, Washington, but he was able to pull it off to have people do it remotely. And it was a really, really good time. My kids still talk about doing that.
Oh man, that's what it's all about. I love to hear that.
And I was looking at some of the reviews from people running that escape room, and one of the things I thought, because when I hear, oh, virtual escape room, I'm kind of like, eh. But when I read some of the reviews of it, one thing I thought was really interesting is people doing it that aren't in the same place. Like a
Yeah.
lady doing it with her mom, and her mom's in Florida, and she's in Kentucky.
So it's really interesting. We started it as a live action experience, right? Like the whole point of me opening an escape room business is I wanted to get people off the couch. I wanted people to, get together and play a game that was fun and educational and something that just kept that DB Cooper story going. And unfortunately, you're right, COVID hit and we were shut down for over 8 months. And we just decided, look, who knows how long this is going to go on for. we've got to figure out a way that we can continue to do this, for one, so we can pay our bills, but two, just to keep that story going. So yeah, we turned it into a virtual game. And I'm happy to say we were able to reopen. So we are live again, and we're offering both. So if you want to come in and play it in person, you can. If you want to book it and hop online with your friends around the world, even, you can do that and play it that way. And either way, you're going to have a wonderful time.
Yeah, and especially if you're listening to this show, you would be way into all these little secrets and Easter eggs that Rob has hidden in his DB Cooper themed escape room. I got such a kick out of some of that stuff.
Yeah, I really packed it full of Easter eggs. You're right. If you're a fan of the actual story and have dug into it with any amount of detail, you'll get a kick out of some of the things you'll find in there for sure.
Oh, absolutely. And I've run into you, Rob, at a couple of the DB Cooper conferences that we've had the last few years.
That's right. Yeah, that's we first met at one of those, right?
Yeah, in person, definitely. How has that changed your opinion on the case, if at all?
You know, it was really interesting. I dipped my toe in with the escape room, and that was it. I mean, I just got sucked right into Cooperland. You know what I mean? Like, I
I
reached
do know
out to
what you mean.
I reached out to Bruce, and he was such a warm, caring dude, and just always has the time to talk to me. And so it really, I just decided, I got to get into this deeper. And so I started going through the forums, and I'm more of a lurker. I'm there like almost every day, but I don't post much. Simply because I don't like to get caught up in the drama that happens a lot, and you know what I'm talking about. There's a
I
lot of
I
really
I do. I'm
there's a lot
there
of fun
multiple
characters.
times a day and don't and hardly ever post.
Yeah, so I'm a lurker, and I'll pipe in every once in a while, but mostly I just watch and learn. And there's a lot of great, smart people that are involved in this. And there's so much to learn. I feel like I'm still learning every day.
Yeah, it's never ending. I mean, there never seems to be an end to this. All right, so you have a pretty big, exciting project, but I want to hold that for a little later while I harass you about some of the typical DB Cooper questions we've got to
Absolutely.
see where you land on some of this stuff. Rob,
Okay, let's hit me up. Let's do this.
is the flight path accurate?
Ooh, that's a really interesting question. Um, I don't think personally that the flight path is accurate. I think Eric is probably a little bit more accurate. I think that they probably flew a little closer to Tina Bar.
Okay, so then, which leads me to my next question. You probably assume the drop zone is a little too far east then as well.
Absolutely. It just, to me, it makes more sense, especially with where the money was found, that Cooper came down a little closer to the river. The river that splits Oregon and Washington basically curves and then heads north. And I think a wise hijacker would probably want to land closer to that river, one, because it's easier to escape.
Yeah, the water landing is something that's tricky. I had Matt Lamadou, a Navy SEAL, PJ, smoke jumper, all around badass. He's if he said if he was going to do the mission, he would plan to land in the water. And then you
Interesting.
talk to
Yeah.
Mark Metzler, who has 55 years of skydiving experience and night jumps, water jumps, everything. And he said I would never plan a water landing.
I
So
think
it's just
if you're
like,
planning a water landing in November in this area, I think you're risking your life for sure. Like it's just wouldn't be smart to jump into the water in November in this region.
well, it wouldn't be the first time he's risking his life that night.
That's true. That's true.
Does he survive the jump?
I think he absolutely survived the jump, and I think where he buried that money was a distinct message to certain people that were involved in this case.
So not only does he survive the jump, but you believe the money at Tina Bar is a plant.
I absolutely think that it was put there on purpose. Yes.
As a nod to the money he offered Tina. Mucklow.
That's a good as theory as any. I think that that I don't know. I don't think he necessarily left the money there as a message to Tina, but I do believe it was a message that I survived.
I mean, the Tina Mucklow, that's quite a coincidence. It's one thing I've always wondered because, there is that he hands her the money out of the bag and
Yeah,
she refuses it. So is that a wink to Tina Mucklow? Hey, I tried to give this to you once before.
yeah, right. I think you're right about that. I think it's a distinct message. He pulled that money out of the bag and offered it to not just Tina, but to the other flight attendants as well. As kind of a, I'm a sorry I put you guys through this, and they made a joke of it and said sorry, we can't accept tips. It's company policy. But he ended up sticking that money in his coat. He didn't stick it back in the bag. And so when he jumped, it's possible when he landed, he took that money out and just he left it. It left it as a message, like I hit the ground, I'm still alive, and you guys aren't going to catch me.
Let me talk to you about that, Rob. Why you're risking your life for this money? Let's say you personally, Rob is going into the Bank of Vancouver, Washington, and you're robbing it, and you see a nice gal working the counter on your way out with your money bag. Do you reach in there and throw her money? I mean, if you're risking your life for this money, why be so cavalier about it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, and it's one thing that I discovered in my research that's not covered very well at all, is the time that Tina Mucklow spent with Dan Cooper. What did they talk about? What kind of questions did Tina ask him? And to me, I feel like there was some sort of relationship built of mutual respect, maybe not admiration, but of respect. He Tina said that he was respectful and he was never dirty or foul mouthed in any way. He was just completely respectful. I think there was some sort of relationship during those few hours they spent together, some sort of mutual respect. And I think when he jumped, he really did want to leave a message and say, I lived.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, we only know a couple things about what they said to each other. Oh, Minnesota's nice country. Is
Yeah.
that Tacoma down there? There's just a handful of nothing things that he says to Tina.
It's a black hole in the transcripts that's never really been investigated. And sure, Tina's given a few interviews, two interviews in the FBI 302s that I've seen. And then she's come out of the woodwork recently to do a few more interviews, which is really exciting. But I don't feel like anybody has really nailed down the definitive Tina Mucklow interview. And Darren, maybe that's your job.
I'll give it a shot.
Yeah, I want to know, like Tina, what was going on in your mind? There was a really great Rolling Stone interview where it kind of gave a few tidbits, but I want more. I need to know more. What was she doing that day? Like, you got up and what? Did you have breakfast? Did you roll into work thinking it was going to be just a typical day? What was your relationship like with the rest of the flight crew? What was that dynamic like? Those are the things that really interest me.
I would be really interested to know what life was like after. Cuz
Yeah,
I mean, I think it was just like constant harassment and people talking to her about this. And it's it's something that did happen to her over a period of 5 to 8 hours one day, but she didn't choose to be involved in it. And to have the rest of your life, like, that's what people want to talk to you about when you had no influence over the situation, you didn't even want to be there in the first place. I
yeah.
could see that as being just terrible, to be known for something that you were just there.
That's definitely a life altering moment. And one thing that I really am impressed by is the fact that she didn't let that moment define her life. You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of people that would have they would have become a media whore basically and tried to make as much money off it as possible. And nowadays, she probably would have been on every TV show interview that's out there. But back then, she's just like, nope, I just want to live a normal life. She continued to work for Northwest Orient for an additional 10 years afterwards. She didn't do any interviews. She was always helpful with the FBI, but she just tried to live a normal life. And I just don't think normal life was ever going to be possible for her after that moment.
Yeah, definitely. One of the things I like the most about Tina Mucklow, and I hope you're listening to this, Tina, is Florence gets the note from Cooper, and this is my interpretation based on what I've read and everything. It it seems like Florence kind of loses her cool and can't keep it together, and then Tina sort of steps in. Hey, I'll take care of this. I'll go sit by him.
Yeah, she's a almost a reluctant hero. Yeah.
And she never gets credit for that because Florence is the one that took the note. Tina chose to step in.
Yeah, Tina saw that Florence was not up to the task of the moment, and she really rose to the occasion.
Certainly did. She even stayed on the plane after all the passengers were let out.
And that's another thing that really intrigues me, Darren, is there's a moment somewhere during that skyjacking where Tina stopped being a scared flight attendant and became a hero. And that's one thing that I've really focused on in my project that I'm working on is telling Tina and that flight crew story in an accurate and entertaining way.
Do you think part of that was because Cooper was able to put them at ease? Because they say immediately after he was never mean, he was friendly, he was polite. You know, they usually don't say that after you've been hijacked or bank robbed. So do you think Cooper had the ability to put them at ease?
I think, you know what? I think the exact opposite happened, Darren. I think Cooper went in to an unknown situation, desperate enough to do anything to get that money. And the flight crew, especially Tina, is the one that kept that situation cool, calm, and collect. They never gave Cooper an opportunity to get too upset. They kept him calm. And I think Tina was able to read his feelings and his emotion and kind of navigate the situation to keep everything safe. And I've thought a lot about this. And there was one thing that Captain Scott's daughter said at the last CooperCon that really stuck with me. And I think about it a lot, man. She said he had a saying: there's the right way, the wrong way, and the sky way. And man, that's what they did. They did it the skyway. The captain, the crew, Tina, they stuck together and they made every right decision possible. When they're being influenced, like, hey, maybe you should bolt down the stairs and run, or maybe grab the stew and make it out the window with the cockpit ladder. They always pushed against drastic decisions and went with the right decision. Cooper never broke his word. So there's no reason to put the airplane, the passengers, and the crew at risk. They did it the Skyway, man.
Well said, Rob. I feel like clapping after that. I haven't heard anyone put it quite that way. And I'll definitely be thinking about that for a while. You make a great point there, especially with how just airline employees carried themselves at the time.
Yeah, yeah, you're right.
One thing that I absolutely hate hearing, and based on what you've said so far, I'm sure you're going to be on the same page. Rob, was the flight crew in on it?
Absolutely not. There's just no evidence to suggest it. None of those people quit right after the Skyjack, and they all continued to work for years and years and years afterwards. Nobody made any big purchases. Nobody raised any suspicions at all. So no, I have no feeling that the flight crew was in on it whatsoever.
Was DB Cooper real, or was he made up? He was never on that plane.
Was DB Cooper Loki? Absolutely. No, of course he was real. Yes, he. There's been a lot of discussion, and there's a ton of suspects. I'm not a suspect guy. I don't focus my attention on who I think it could be. Although I will be honest, I read everybody's theories and I love it. Every suspect is interesting. I'll never stop doing that. I just don't. I tend to focus more on the actual heroics of the heroes involved. Like I said, the flight crew, and but there's so many more people. There's the men and women on the ground at Seattle working tirelessly to find that ransom. The money and the parachutes, and you've got Detective Owen McKenna, who's racing around Seattle picking up the money from the bank, and all these people are under tremendous pressure, knowing that there's all these people sitting on a plane on the tarmac in Seattle. Um, just imagine that all these people working tirelessly to try and track down this guy's ransom, and one wrong move, and boom, it's over.
Do you think that it's possible Cooper stayed in the airplane and did not jump and hid in the airplane? When it landed in Reno, he somehow walked away.
Anything's possible. I would never say no, but that plane was searched pretty thoroughly afterwards with humans and with dogs, and I just don't see that being possible. I'm of the belief that the easiest answer is the right answer. And I come from escape rooms, so I'm into puzzles. I get it. Like, I tend not to want to overthink the evidence. And I usually follow Occam's razor. The easiest answer is the right answer, man. He jumped. He wanted those parachutes for a reason, and he jumped. Did he jump where they say he jumped? I think so. Could he have potentially jumped somewhere else? Sure, but you know, I think the evidence suggests that he did jump.
What about his bomb, Rob? Was that real?
That is the $1 million question, isn't it? Like, now I've built a replica version of that bomb. Like, so I kind of understand how easy it is to make it look real. I personally think if you're desperate enough to get on a plane to skyjack it for a lot of money, you're probably also desperate enough to die for it. So my personal feeling is, yeah, it was probably real.
I like that you said that. It's a bold statement not many people go with. I was of the mind like 99% bombs fake. And then Shayna Roth wrote this true crime book where she made the example of all it takes is one person saying, I don't think that's a bomb. That's not a real
Yeah,
bomb. And then
sure.
you're totally screwed.
Yeah,
But
it's
on
a
the other
huge gamble.
hand, how many people are going to question a guy who says, I have a bomb when you're on an airplane?
Especially these young 20 something flight attendants, right? Like, he chose the perfect people to terrorize because they're not heroes. They're just young ladies trying to earn a living. And he knew he had all the power. He knew the pilots weren't going to come out. He had everybody in the perfect position. Nobody could even sneak up behind him.
Yeah, and my favorite thing about the bomb is the description because it is a cartoon bomb. It is if you were watching Bugs Bunny and he had a bomb in a briefcase, it would look exactly like what Florence Schaffner described. I
Yes.
mean, the only thing that's missing is, the alarm clock with the bells on the top of it.
Yeah, that's true, isn't it? And a roadrunner zipping by.
But yeah, I do wonder about that. It's and the fact that he took it with him. Why? If it's
I,
fake, you could just leave it on the plane. Like, who cares?
my gut feeling is that that briefcase had another use other than the scare factor. You know what I mean? Like, he may have had some other things, items in there that helped him with his jump. Who knows? And let's not forget, and nobody really talks about it in interviews. He also had a manila sack. What was in there? What was that all about?
I plan on bringing that up because you did bring it up in your other project here. We'll talk about in a sec.
Hmm.
There's two sketches, Rob, two primary ones. There's what, seven total, but you have the Bing Crosby sketch and the Cary
Sure, the
Grant.
classic one. Yeah. There's also one that looks like Dan Rather, in my opinion.
Dan Rather? Which one's that? The
It,
angry-looking one?
yeah, I mean, there's one. I don't know if that's the one you're specifying, but there is one where I'm like, that looks rather like Dan Rather.
Do you think the fact that they released two sketches that are pretty different hurt the case?
I think it may have at the time because it's rather confusing, right? Like, especially when it just happens and it's fresh in everybody's mind. Which sketch do you go by? And let's be honest, that sketch is very vague to begin with, anyway. Um, Obviously, look at the amount of suspects we've had. They all look like the guy. I mean, uncanny. And maybe that was by design. Maybe Cooper did that by design, just to blend in to the public.
Or the public did that by design? I mean, you talk about 40 to 55-year-old dudes in 1971, they all look the same.
Absolutely. Yep. Business suit, hair parted to the right, maybe a little pomade in there, and that's that. Like, that was the look.
Yeah. Smoke, drank, potentially
Yep.
had military experience. Oh, yeah, that's every dude in 1971.
Absolutely.
Rob, why is this case still unsolved?
I think it's unsolved for a multitude of reasons. I think one, Cooper saw an opportunity. He saw a weakness, and he created a plan and then attacked that weakness. And he knew full well that there was no type of security, and he showed the world how easy it was to take a weapon of any kind aboard an airplane at that time. And he knew there were probably going to be copycats, and he knew that the window of opportunity would eventually close. And so he struck at the right moment at the right time, and here we are. Like, I also think that you know, a lot like Bruce, that the FBI botched the case from the get go. They didn't get boots on the ground searching for Cooper for almost 48 hours after he jumped out of that plane. You know, they lost multitudes of evidence. You know, where those 8 cigarette butts go. They collected all kinds of fingerprint evidence. Where did that go? It's interesting. Too many hands in the kitchen, man. There was just too many hands cooking, and not enough people really keeping a close watch on that evidence. Such a shame. Lesson learned, though, right?
Hopefully.
Not to mention the fact that they worked so hard to photocopy this money, right, through the Record Act, all these serial numbers, and yet nobody really was checking serial numbers back then. So that money could have easily slipped back into the public, and nobody would have been the wiser.
What do you think it would take to solve this?
I think you're going to need hard evidence. Like, I'm not of the belief that you're going to solve this by focusing in on deathbed confessions and mysterious suspects. I think you're going to solve this with actual boots on the ground, hard evidence. We need to find that parachute. We need to find that money. Now, if you got a suspect that tells you he's DB Cooper and he hands you a 20, case closed. Like, that's it. It's going to take that money, and it's got to be out there somewhere. Somebody, like, if I were Cooper, I'd be proud that I pulled this off, and I'd probably keep a 20 just in case. Who knows?
Oh, 100%.
So if you got a grandpa out there and he was alive during that time, and maybe he had some military experience, maybe he had some parachute experience, check his attic. Get up in there and look around.
If you had to place a bet, is Cooper alive today?
Oh, I really wish he was alive, but I personally think that the secret went to his grave. I don't think he died during the jump, like I said before, but I think him being alive would be a miracle today. I mean, you saw he smoked like a chimney on the plane. That's not healthy, obviously. My guess is that he's probably passed by now.
Yeah, my 6-year-old boy told me once, he's like, Dad, I know that DB Cooper is dead. And I was like, oh, really? How's that? He said, he was a smoker.
There you go. Smart kid.
Will this ever be solved?
Will it ever be solved? Do we want it to be? I mean, for
Well,
me,
that's
it's
a
bad
different
for business.
question.
I mean, for me, it's bad for business if it's solved.
Well, me too, if I
It could
consider
be.
this a business.
It could be solved. Yes, I think it could be, but it's going to take somebody coming out of the woodwork with actual hard evidence and not a feeling or I know my dad was DB Cooper, my grandpa was. You know, foggy memories are not going to solve this case. Hard physical evidence is going to solve it.
Do you think there is a person, a handful of people out there who know exactly what happened?
Other than the flight crew, um,
Other than Cooper?
yeah. I mean, we all have family. I mean, Cooper wasn't just a loner that lived in the mountains, and well, maybe he was, but I don't believe he was just a loner that lived in the mountains. He had a mom, he had a dad, he may have had some siblings, and who knows? He might have children out there that we don't know about, and that's where the biggest shame for me comes in. Like that we lost those cigarette butts. We don't have a clean DNA profile that I'm aware of. And you know, part of me is like, man, they caught the Golden State Killer because somebody put up some DNA from the crime onto a DNA website. You know, they tracked a distant relative to the Golden State Killer through 23andMe or some website like that, right? Hasn't been done with Cooper, and it's a shame.
That is a shame. But what if that did solve the case, but the guy died in 1987 and no one knows anything about it? That to me would be so much worse. To
Yeah,
know that it was, Billy Bob Smith that did this, but we're never going to know any of the details. The planning, when his
yeah,
pulled his
right.
shoe, when his boots hit the ground.
Sure. That's a very interesting story that we'll probably never hear.
Oh, that don't say that. That makes me
But
so
you know,
sad.
at the same time, you know, the other flip of the coin is that he's still alive, um, alive and well, resting with his feet up in Jamaica, sipping a bourbon and seven. You know, like, and maybe someday he will come out of the woodwork. If, and I've always had this feeling, and I've talked with Eric about this, especially about his about Sheridan Peterson, is that I always thought if we could find the guy but know that he's not willing to admit it, is to appease or appeal to his sense of history and be like, look, there's been so many people that have come out of the woodwork and claimed to have done this job. Don't you want to accept the legend that is yours before you go? Don't you want to come out and say, yeah, I did this and here's why? I just, to me, if I was that man, I'd want it to be known before I passed. And I'd want to do it before I'm on my deathbed so people actually take me seriously. But that only works, Darren, if they come out with hard physical evidence. Here's the 20, here's my parachute pack. You do the numbers.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I want to know exactly what happened so bad,
Yeah.
but yeah, I guess it seems kind of unlikely we'll get to know at this point. But here's what I am willing to offer: if somebody is listening to this and they know exactly what happened, I'm willing to record it and hold on to it until you die, and then I'll release it. So, Cooper,
There
if
you
you're
go.
listening to this, I got your back, man.
And Cooper, you got a free escape experience on me, pal. Anytime. You just call me up.
Rob, why have so many people confessed?
I think I think the public over the years have really glommed onto the fact, not fact, but they've glommed onto the idea that Cooper was a hero, that he was a Robin Hood of the skies, if you will. And so people want to take that success and be revered as the legend himself. I think that similar cases have happened in the past. You know, great example of that is a guy that claimed to be William H. Bonney. You know, Billy the Kid, and that he made a deal with the sheriff Pat Garrett to let him live, and somebody else died and took his place in that grave, and he went on to lead a different life outside of cattle rustling and gunslinging, you know? I just think people, they find these heroes, folk heroes, whatever you call them, and they just want to be recognized and loved for something incredible. I think that's really what it boils down to.
I can't see myself doing that though.
Not everybody is that way, you know. Not everybody's that way. I like to equate it to some older gentlemen that I interviewed back in my college days. I was talking to a gentleman about his experiences in World War II, specifically in the German front, and his stories were amazing, but they were also maybe peppered with a little fiction just to bolster the story and make it seem even that more incredible. One of them was a time when this gentleman stated that he was under attack and single handedly took out a German tank by climbing it and throwing a grenade down the hatch. Did that happen? Maybe. Could it have been a fanciful story too? Certainly. But I think people, they want to be a part of history, and if they can be the hero, they're going to try. Not everybody though. I certainly wouldn't do that.
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, in that area, Clark County, Cowlitz County, I've talked to a million people who know who DB Cooper was. Oh, it was this guy who used to live down the street from me, blah blah blah. And I'm sure you've heard the same thing.
Yeah.
But so few of those are even worth, asking a second question about, because I've heard so many of them. And
Yeah.
in that area, everybody does have a DB Cooper story.
I just had
Well,
one come
over
out
a
of the
certain
woodwork.
age.
One of my employees, his girlfriend, his last name is Cooper, and we were having a discussion over dinner one time, and she actually told me that her grandfather, who has a military background, who has parachuting experience, was actually brought in and questioned as a suspect. Now he had an alibi, so he was released, but it's so interesting how close you can be and how many people were actually interviewed as a suspect. To me, that's fascinating.
Oh, everyone with a U.S. parachuting license at the time. It's crazy how the FBI really had nowhere to go, so they just thought, well, we'll look at everyone.
Well, and you got to think back then, parachuting, like how many people were truly doing that? Like, it's not like today where you could just run down and do a tandem jump just because you feel like it. Like back then, it was definitely a more of a niche hobby, I guess you would say.
Oh, definitely. Why did he choose the name Dan Cooper?
Wow, so many different theories about that. Obviously, the European comic book comes to mind, which I have an Easter egg in the escape room for. I'm not sure if you saw that on camera, but it's just, I don't think there's any rhyme or reason as to why he chose that name. It's just a generic name, Dan Cooper. It's like John Smith almost. It could be almost anybody. Did it have deeper meaning? I just don't know. There's no evidence to suggest other than the parachuting comic book from France and Canada to suggest there's any other meaning.
Okay, now I'm angry with you, Rob, because
Okay,
the
here we
the
go.
Dan Cooper comic connection is something that I'm just so fascinated in. Are you
Oh
telling
yeah,
me if I rob a train and then I shoot webs out of my fingers to escape from there, and the name that I used to board the train was Peter Parker, do you think that's a little on the nose?
I almost feel like it's a joke. You know what I mean? Like if it was based on that comic book, and I don't think you're wrong, Darren. I think the comic book is kind of a subtle funny. I think that a man with potential military background that is potentially traveled the world, maybe seeing one of those comics, probably thought it was kind of cute.
Even if he does it as a joke, I like that as well.
Sure. Yeah.
But I just there to give a fake name and to land on one that has such an insane coincidence to the crime. I don't even think I could calculate the odds on that because there's an infinite number of names.
It's like, how do you choose that one? If you don't pull it from the comic book, how do you come up with that? You just run through the phone book, and then you get going on the media snafu where they dub him DB or Cronkite's mistake, D.A. Cooper. That one didn't stick, but there was a man in Portland whose name was D.B. Cooper that had his door kicked in because of this. It's just interesting. Like, where did that name come from? That's one of the biggest mysteries.
It comes from the comic book.
I want to believe that.
I want to
It's just
believe that too.
it's the best. It's the best part of the story. Like, it's got to have meaning, and that's I think what all of us Cooper fans really want is we want the story to be true. We want these theories that we've worked so hard on and poured so much passion into to be true.
Yeah, and you know, I like you said, I'm not a suspect guy because the case itself is already more interesting than anything I could think of, and it really did happen. And one thing that I'm just not a fan of, although I've promoted their theories, is that Cooper was the Zodiac killer or that
Oh
he
yeah.
committed these other crimes. And I feel like there's a need to make it more exciting than it really was by combining these unsolved crimes. And I don't see a need to do that when the case itself is already, in my opinion, one of the craziest things that's ever happened.
Well, and at that point you're just grasping at straws, right? Like you're just seeing patterns where there aren't any. What do they call that? Pareidoia? Doia? I don't know. There's a technical name for it where like EVPs, like you hear something on a recording and your brain tells you what it's saying, but it could be saying anything. There's just some connections are a real reach, if you ask me.
Why are there so many suspects in this case?
I think there's so many suspects because the real guy was such a mystery and he was so good at covering his tracks, not to leave any clues behind. His only mistake was leaving those cigarette butts. And of course, in those days, like DNA wasn't a concern. Like that wasn't really on anybody's mind, right? So I can see the oversight of leaving the cigarette butts as a casual mistake. But he took his note back that he gave to the flight attendants to give to the pilots. He got his note back. He got his envelope back. He made sure he took his matchbook. And who knows what else he did? Did he wipe down the seats to try to get rid of fingerprints? Did he take his cups that he drank his booze from? Like, he didn't leave much to go on, except for his tie, which there's been countless speculations on with the titanium and this and that. Personally, as fascinating as the tie is, there's been so many people over the last 50 years that have handled that tie that it's really, for me, hard to take it with anything other than a grain of salt. Does that make sense?
Definitely.
I mean, I just to put a pin on that. I think there's so many suspects because it was left so open ended as to who he could have been.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Do you think that DB Cooper, okay, you have to bet your life on this one, Rob. Is
Okay.
DB Cooper one of the suspects that we are talking about already?
Boy, there's some pretty good suspects, and I'm not going to name drop any because I don't want to get attacked by anybody. There's some pretty interesting suspects out there, but my gut and my intuition says no. I think that DB Cooper was a ghost, not in the real sense, but like any government spook, he was a literal ghost. Like he disappeared into the ether and we'll never know or see who he was again. I think he really probably enjoyed the fact that there was a lot of different suspects out there. It was for him probably a really fun game.
Oh, I've always fantasized that he was reading the books and going on the forums
And going to the parties, right?
and
Like
going to the parties.
I I there's a gentleman in town that I live in here in Vancouver, Washington, that owns a really wonderful local theater in downtown Vancouver. It's where the last Cooper convention was, right?
Kiggins.
And Kiggins, yes, thank you. I didn't know if I could name drop, but Dan at the
Yeah,
Kiggins,
Kiggins Theater, great place. Everyone should check
love
it
it.
out.
Yeah, please support the guy. He's amazing, and he made a really fun radio drama that I got to witness live. And right in the middle of the program, at a really important part, somebody shouted out, "I'm Dan Cooper. I'm sitting right here." Of course, the show went on, and everybody kind of laughed, and but it really got me thinking. It's like, man, that really could be Dan Cooper. Wouldn't that be the kick? Wouldn't that be awesome? Sitting here with us right now, watching a radio broadcast of the most important moment of his life, and nobody knows who he is.
Yeah, I've always fantasized about that. I always picture him like sitting by the fire reading Max Gunther's book, DB Cooper,
Right.
What Really
Yeah.
Happened, with a bourbon and soda, of course.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And look, if he needs a ghostwriter, I'm here for you, brother. Like, hit me up. We'll write your memoirs and we'll get it out there. And just like you said, like if you don't want to publish until you pass, then we'll write a contract.
We're here for you, Cooper. All right, so we got. Oh, let me ask you one more.
Sure.
You have to pick one of the existing suspects. Who do you back up? Who's your favorite?
Oh well, this might be controversial, and I've got two that are my two faves, and the one that really got me into it, and God, I'm almost embarrassed to say it, but it was Kenny Christensen.
You shouldn't
Um,
be embarrassed. I got into this through Kenny Christensen also. My
okay,
first book was Skyjack, and it led me
yes,
immediately into purchasing Into the Blast.
exactly.
And I was lucky enough to meet Robert Blevins in person.
I've never met him in person, but we've shared plenty of emails and talks, and my hat's off to him. Like he's put some incredible research into his book, and I think Kenny is a very interesting guy. And like I said earlier, all the suspects are interesting, and Kenny's got a great story. His story is pretty fascinating. The fact that he worked for the airline that was hijacked as an international purser, spent some time in and around that area, lived in the area, had a very fascinating house with a hidey hole up in the attic. Like, there's just interesting parts to his story. Again, there's no hard evidence, which I think it really needs to really seal the deal. Sheridan Peterson, on the other hand, is another fascinating subject who obviously just passed. God rest his soul. He had a very fascinating life, journeyed all over the world, was very cagey, almost enjoyed the cat and mouse game with the FBI. And even himself came out and said, "Yeah, I should definitely be considered a suspect. I could have done it." His ex wife even said, "Yeah, he definitely had the skills to pull this off." And most importantly, he had a grudge. And to me, that's very telling. Did he do it? We will never know now, unless, as his children or family are going through his belongings, find that $20 bill. Wouldn't that be something?
That sure would be something. The Yeah, you have to keep at least 120 from the hijacking because they knew the serial number. So it's not just another 20.
Sure.
It's obvious evidence that you pulled this off.
Right. Yeah. A ticket stub, a the matchbook, the parachute container. There's all kinds of evidence out there. That briefcase, where'd that go? Is it out there in the forest that's deteriorating with time, or is it in some old man's attic as a keepsake souvenir that eventually will be discovered? Only time's going to tell.
Yeah, I think about that briefcase. Like, did he tie it to himself? Did he keep it with him? Did he just throw it out of the back of the plane?
I often wondered, and this kind of goes back to the briefcase and the bomb itself. And did it actually was it real or did it have a purpose? I've read some reports and some people theorize that that it was actually road flares and that maybe he used those road flares as a light on his descent. Feasible. And in fact, I seem to remember, and I could be wrong, but I don't think I am. I think I remember reading in the 302 somewhere that somebody in the Vancouver area reported some sort of flare dropping from the sky around the time of the jump. So is that true? Don't know, but it is intriguing.
Oh yeah. Okay, Rob. So you've got your Northwest Escape experience going. You're falling deeper and deeper into the DB Cooper vortex.
It's more like a bear trap, like you step on it and you can't get away.
And you decided you wanted to do another project with Cooper. Would you mind telling us about that?
So yeah, I am. I've always worked in the entertainment industry. From the moment I graduated high school, worked as an actor, as a writer, producer, director. I've spent some time in radio. I've kind of done a lot of things, a jack of all trades, if you will. And one thing that's always really bothered me is there hasn't been an accurate telling of the movie. I mean, there's the Treat Williams movie with Robert Duvall called The Pursuit of D.B. Cooper, but that only deals with the hijacking in the first 5 or 10 minutes. After that, it turns into a Dukes of Hazzard road trip.
I haven't seen that in a while, but does it even deal with the hijacking at all? My recollection is the opening for the movie is him jumping out of the plane.
It really is. Like the first few minutes is about that. It doesn't go into much detail about the hijacking at all. And then, yeah, it just becomes a weird road chase movie.
Yeah, I remember him like drinking a beer and driving a pickup truck with a girl around his arm. Like,
Yeah,
what
and
does
then
this
they
have
end
to
up
do with it?
having a love scene on the highway, and it's just like, okay. I mean, I think of it as a DB movie in name only. Like, it's not accurate whatsoever. In fact, he in the movie he jumps. It's daylight, and it's a beautiful, day with barely a cloud in the sky. It's just okay. They obviously didn't do their research. And
Well,
as a his
what about Bigfoot versus DB Cooper?
ah you, that's great. I have seen it. And I would never recommend it to anybody. It's almost like virtual, like I don't, I can't even explain it. It's like softcore porn without the porn. You know what I mean?
And without girls,
You're
it's
right. It's just a bunch of shirtless dudes running around.
shirtless dudes working out. Like, I guess it's a subgenre type of movies. The guy who made it, like, I guess all of his movies are kind of like that.
Yes,
But
I have a director friend that's aware of the dude's career and says he's notorious for that sort of thing. Right.
great
So
poster, but it's very light on Bigfoot and DB Cooper content, which is
yeah, it's
interesting.
awful. Yeah, it's awful. Don't bother with it, guys. Don't worry.
I disagree.
So
I highly recommend it.
So I've taken up the mantle of writing a as accurate as possible take on the DB Cooper hijacking. My screenplay is called Dan Cooper, and it's a minute by minute procedural of the actual hijacking from the moment it started until they land in Reno. And I mix in a lot of real facts, a lot of stories that come right out of the 302s, the flight transcripts. I try to use the dialogue as accurately as possible. And again, it's a Hollywood movie, so I've taken a few liberties here and there, but I don't think anything that really changes the story dramatically. And so, yeah, I've got that. Just finished it, wrapped up my third draft, which I sent to you, and I've sent to Bruce. You guys are the only guys in the Cooper community that have seen it, and it's just because I value you guys' feedback. So
I love it. I loved it, Rob. I want to say first of all, whenever I listen to a podcast, a movie, whatever about DB Cooper, I always fast forward through the hijacking
yeah,
because I've heard it so many times, and I'm like, they're gonna get this detail wrong, and I
yeah,
just
right.
don't care. I'm more interested in what they have to say about what's
A
going
great
on.
example is the HBO Max documentary. They got Cooper sitting on the wrong side of the plane. I'm like, how do you get that detail wrong?
Yeah, and your script is just the hijacking. There's no fluff. There's not a lot of wild speculation or anything like that. It's so accurate. I loved reading some of the obscure names that uh, you know 8 people would know were accurate.
Sure,
Um,
right.
what like Al Jolstein and some of these other people,
Yeah.
NWO crews. It's
But
like
it was
only
important to
I'm gonna
me.
get that reference.
It's important to me though, because those people were part of the story and it's never been told. You know what I mean? Like, not even in the documentaries, they always focus on just the flight crew and suspects. They never really focus on the men and women that were on the ground running around with their heads cut off trying to save these people's lives.
Yeah, I agree. You don't hear. I mean, you guess you hear Tina and Florence and Alice occasionally, uh, Captain Scott and Radizak, but outside of that,
What about Al Lee? You know, he was there. He was the head pilot of Northwest Orient in Seattle, and he was the ground man. He was put in charge of coordinating the parachutes and the money, and he's the one that delivered those things to the plane in the detective's car, Owen McKenna, right? Like he handed them off to Tina. His story's never been told. I've never seen an interview with Al Lee. That's fascinating. That guy, like, what was going through his mind?
yeah, I am so impressed with that. Like McKenna, that's a guy that no one really knows. I guess no one
Hmm.
knows, even people deep into the vortex. And like I've read his name in the 302s. But yeah, even myself didn't pay attention to that. So the detail in this is incredible. I have two things I want to pull from that I just
Sure.
absolutely loved. You mentioned that in Reno the dogs ate the food
Oh,
that was
yes.
brought on. I love that. That really happened. Great detail.
Thank you.
Um,
Thank you.
my other favorite one was on, I believe it's the very last page. You described the gentleman's suit as a glorious 80s brown suit. I love that. A glorious 80s brown suit.
You know, when you're writing a screenplay, you got to paint the scene with words, right? Because your script is the roadmap for the producers and the director to tell that story. And so as an artist, I I have a vision and I just kind of want to make sure people see that. I grew up in the 80s, so I want to make sure that's accurate.
I don't think I've ever read a script like that before. Maybe like in high school doing a play or something, but
Hmm.
on a much shorter, less professional level.
Yeah, reading a screenplay is a lot different from reading a manuscript or a book for sure. Because there's scene headings, you know, that tell you is it interior or exterior. There's quotes, you know, is the character talking on screen or off screen? Is it a voiceover? So it reads a little different, but I think once you get the hang of it, you get kind of swept up in it.
Oh yeah, because I started at maybe page 3. I started visualizing it as a movie in my head.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, it wasn't that hard for me to do because I knew like what the plane looked like, what the people looked like, what the area looked like. So I could just place them right in there. I mean, I watched your movie in my head twice now, actually.
Oh, good. I'm hoping that the second draft that I sent you was better than the first. That's the intent.
It was a little bit cleaner. I could see that it was, I mean, it's very similar, but it was like more polished.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You polish and you edit, and you trim, you get rid of the needless stuff. And I got rid of a lot of stuff that was just repeating information.
And so we're hoping that this is on. I guess saying going to the movie theater is kind of a little bit weird right now, but I would absolutely love to see this movie get made. We've had, DB Cooper documentaries, some were better than others. And then the movies, like Robert I mentioned, are not good. I mean, no offense to Treat Williams and Robert Duvall. That movie's terrible. And
It's not
Bigfoot
good.
versus DB Cooper, I mean, it's it's funny. I mean, if you want to smoke a joint and watch that movie, it's
Yeah,
hilarious.
you might laugh. If you want a better laugh, you might want to watch Up a Paddle or whatever that movie was, without a
Without a
paddle.
paddle.
Without a paddle, you probably get more joy out of that. Even though
Yes.
again, all the facts are wrong and it takes place in Oregon and this and that. But you know, there was in my research, I did find a movie, and I found it on Amazon Prime called The Skyjacker, and it looked like a low budget, maybe even a college project that somebody made, and it was it was pretty good. It wasn't perfect, and I could tell they did their research and they probably read some of the flight transcripts, but they got a lot of facts wrong. Like they didn't use Tina's real name. They didn't have the flight engineer. They didn't have. They only had two flight attendants. So there's all these little changes. And Cooper was a 22-year-old ginger kid. Like, so there were some things you had to look past, but it was probably the most entertaining, accurate version. Obviously, it's hard to find though.
Did they show that at Kiggins at CooperCon?
Dan at the Kiggins, think I think he actually knows the director of that film, so it might have played there. Yeah,
I want to say I saw that there.
you probably did. So, and you probably can agree that it of any of the Cooper movies out there, that's the one that you probably want to see first. But even then, it needs improvement. It needs a Hollywood budget, and it needs to focus not just on the flight crew, but everybody involved.
Okay, I found it. It's called The Skyjacker,
Hmm.
inspired by the true story of DB Cooper. You can rent it on Amazon Prime for $1.99.
Yeah, and you know what? It's worth it. If you're a Cooper fan and you want to watch a movie about it right now, then you could rent that and you'll get your money's worth. $2, not that bad. There's also another one. It's more of a short film. Gosh, and I think it was called The Man Who Fell from the Sky, and it was more of a Spielberg style coming of age where a young boy finds Cooper hiding in his barn and they kind of develop a friendship, and then he's got to get away, and um, that one is pretty funny.
I
I would
have
watch.
seen that one also.
Yeah, you got to watch that one with a kind of a smile on your face because it's kind of cheesy. But
Did you see? It's a documentary, but the Walter Recca one, DB Cooper. Is it The Real Story? The name of their documentary?
I have the documentary. I bought it on DVD at the convention. I've got the book. I just haven't brought myself to watch it.
It's really good. I mean, people have their opinions on the Recca story, but it's good. I like it. It's told well. I enjoy the whole ride of that story. And like we said earlier, these suspects are so interesting.
Yeah, they're all
Whether they're
interesting.
yeah, whether they're Cooper or not, I want everyone to know about Barb Dayton. I
Yeah,
want everyone to know about Richard Floyd McCoy. I mean, just insane wild lives,
yeah.
whether
They
or
have
not the Cooper part is true.
each one has their own unique, fascinating story, and you're so right. Whether they're Cooper or not, they're fun to learn about.
Yeah, and like McCoy, for example, the Cooper part, leave that out. The rest of his life is insane. Vietnam, highly
Yeah,
decorated war veteran. He's going to school at BYU at the time, studying criminal justice when he hijacks the plane, and then the National Guard calls him to fly a helicopter to look for himself.
yeah. So insane. That could be a movie all in itself. You could strip it of the Cooper stuff, and it would still be great.
I wonder if you could make a movie about McCoy because his widow sued and won the movie rights for DB Cooper, the real McCoy.
Hmm.
And so I wonder if
Well, that's where you get into the tricky part of Hollywood and rights to people's stories, right? And like you don't need the rights to a person's life story if they are a major public figure and all of the information you're using is in the public knowledge, right? Like, and that's where I kind of skirt the line is I'm not drawing on anything but the FBI 302s and the transcripts to tell my version of the story. I tried to avoid going into any territory that was super different than what's been reported on or acknowledged as being truth. But you could get yourself in some hot water if all of a sudden you're saying Tina Mucklow was in on the story or in on the heist. You know what I mean? Like that can get you into a pickle.
Is that something you worry about?
I don't worry about it, no, because I have all my sources I've drawn from and can point right to it. Like this is where I'm pulling this from. This is where I got this idea of my story, and it's all public knowledge. It's all in the FBI 302s, which are public, and also I've taken a lot of idea and dialogue from the actual interviews of these people, like Dwayne Ingram for that matter. Like in the part of my script at the beginning, it starts on the beach at Tina's bar where Brian Ingram finds the money, and that's all public information.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think. I don't feel like anyone is painted in an unflattering light in your script at
I
all.
got some feedback from Bruce on the first draft. I painted some of the passengers in a certain light because I needed them to be a certain way. And he gave me some nice feedback. And so I trimmed some of those to paint them to be more realistic and more human and not so caricature. Yeah. So, bottom line is we just want to tell a really unique human story. And so our next step now is I've submitted to a bunch of screenwriting competitions. I submitted the script to an industry website known as the Blacklist. And for people that don't know, it's basically a website where you can put up your script, get it read by professionals in the industry, and get it rated. And if you score a certain way or high enough, then you get blasted out to the industry. And so, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the best, I got rated a 7 on the script. To me, that's pretty good. And it's only going to get better as I dial it in and make it even better. So, right now, I've got a professional Hollywood screenwriter who I made friends with many, many, many years ago. And I hit him up to see if he'd read it. He agreed to. And I'll take his professional notes and we'll dial it in and go even more. One thing you should know, and it's kind of funny, is I actually finished this script probably about 2 years ago. And I immediately sent it out to my connections in the industry. And a friend of mine who's a director optioned it immediately and shopped it around for a few months and got incredible feedback for it. And he came back to me and said, "Rob, I want to make this movie, but I've just been told that if I bring this movie to and try to get it made, that the people with the money are going to take it away from me and give it to somebody with a little bit more high profile resume." So that's now I just need to get it sold.
What would be your wildest dream for this script?
The wildest dream would be Steven Spielberg knocks on my door and says, "Rob, I love your script. We're best friends now, and I'm going to make your movie."
I like the best friends part.
Yeah, well,
Might
he's
as well.
might as well. Yeah, we might as well get to know each other. We're going to work together.
If let's say it goes to Netflix, is
Sure.
part of you sad that you don't get to see it in the theater?
So that's an interesting question, Darren, because I'm a movie guy. I mean, I grew up in the '80s watching the best movies ever made, and I've got a home theater that's decorated with movie posters and movie props, and I've always been a cinema dude. But the simple truth is, cinema is changing, and movie theaters, unfortunately, are dying. I mean, you've spent time in Vancouver. There's a really, or was a really awesome movie theater chain called Cinetopia, and it was beautiful. You go in, and it was like living room style. You could put your feet up. You could order food from your seat, and they bring it to you. It was just a glorious way to watch a movie.
Yeah,
They went out of
especially like
business.
15 years ago, it was a huge deal. There wasn't
Yeah,
anything else like that.
yeah, right. And now it's out of business, and AMC took it over. And last time I went to that theater, I walked into the bathroom, and it was just filthy. I ordered a drink, which you now have to go fill yourself, and the soda machine was just disgusting. And then you go into the theater, and it's like sticky as can be, and just like I feel like theater owners and maybe just the corporations have really lost sight of the the wonderful feeling of going to the movies, and now it's just a dirty experience. So, and then you add COVID on top of that. Not too many people want to go to them. I want this movie to play in the theater. I mean, that's my ultimate dream. That's the nostalgia in me wants it to see it on the big screen. If it made it to Netflix as my first project, it wouldn't hurt my feelings. Uh, not at all. Is it the best way for me to see it? I mean, I like I said, I'd prefer to see it on the big screen, but at this point, in this day and age, I'd see it on any screen. I'd even be okay if they were just like, you know what, Rob, we're just going to show this on the airline flights on the back of those little seats. Like I'd be okay with that too.
Yeah, I asked that question because I feel the exact same way as you. I love going to the movie theater. I love those small theaters. I mean, I remember going to the Joy Theater in Tigard as a little
Yes, I've
kid
been, I've been
because
there.
they used to have like dollar movies in the summertime, and so
Yep,
my grandma would take us, me and my sister, and we'd go see some second run movie for $1 and have popcorn.
dude, I saw the movie Cocktail with Tom Cruise and Die Hard double feature in that theater back when those movies were just released. One of the greatest memories of my life. Such a great little theater.
Is the Joy Theater still open?
Oh heck yeah, it is. I mean, maybe not right now with the COVID world, but yeah, my friend Brett, the director who optioned the screenplay, he premiered his movie there, or had a showing there for cast and crew called movie called Pretty Broken. Pretty great movie if you guys haven't seen it. Yeah, so yeah, it's still kicking, man. Little mom and pop one screen theaters are still alive out there. Support them.
Yeah, and like the Kiggins Theater. I mean, the when you walk in the front door of that place, it's beautiful, and
Oh, it's one of
you
those
just
old
feel the
school.
history.
Yeah, so much history. Yes. I met with Dan not too long ago because he was re-recording his DB Cooper radio drama. He wanted me to be DB Cooper. And so I met with him, and he took me upstairs and behind the booth where the projection booth. He took me to his office. It just is a magical place. You could feel it in your bones when you walk through there.
Yeah, I mean, if I had a movie, it would be if it only went to Netflix, it'd be so sad. Because yeah, I agree with you. I do have that love for cinema. I have a home theater as well, but I was talking to my friend about it, and he's like, "Oh, I don't care about the movies anymore. I have a big TV at my house. I'd rather just watch it at home."
Yeah, and I feel that I got a 60-inch TV, and I've got the 5.1 surround sound, and it looks good and it sounds good. But you lose out on that communal experience, right? Like you go into a movie not knowing what to expect, and like right now I'm looking at my Ghostbusters poster. Like I remember as a kid walking into that theater having no idea what to expect and being surrounded by all these people with the same feeling, and then have that movie come up and wash over you, and the communal experience of it's just there's nothing like that. So you lose that when it goes to something like Netflix. But at the same time, the way people are watching entertainment, it's just changing, and you've got to change with it.
Ghostbusters 2 was the first movie I saw in the theater.
Ah, nice.
I
Mine was
was 4
ET.
years old. All right, Rob, what haven't Oh, I know what we haven't covered yet. In your script, I made a note of this.
Okay.
You talk about the brown paper bag that he brings on the plane.
Yes.
Can we talk about what you theorize was in there in the
Yeah,
script?
sure. Like I don't think there's any harm in that because it's not like a major plot spoiler, but I decided I'm going to answer what I thought was in that bag. And so I started thinking, well, what would somebody bring with them that had parachute experience that would be small enough to go unnoticed and but would be useful enough that you would need it for your jump? And one of them was a pair of goggles for skydiving. Because obviously he had his sunglasses, but I'm thinking you jump out of a plane, and I've never jumped out of a plane. Maybe this is a question for Eric. But I thought if you jumped out wearing his sunglasses, they're going to fly off, right? Like they're just going to get whipped off or something. So I just speculated that he probably brought some sort of parachute goggles. That way, as he's descending through the clouds. He's not tearing up and he can see. And then I also speculated that he brought a wrist altimeter so that he can descend at night and kind of have an idea of where he is as to relation to the ground.
I love it. I love that you put the brown paper sack, the manila, whatever he has got. I've heard people say it was green, but I like brown paper sack pretty much. I've talked to a bunch of people about this. What was in there? If you could
Yeah,
speculate what was in there. And when I talk to people who actually have jumped out of planes a bunch of times, they all say the exact same thing: goggles and gloves. They're like, jumping in a suit, no big deal. It doesn't really matter what
sure,
you're wearing. You have to have goggles, and it'd be real nice to have gloves.
sure.
So I've always thought it has to be goggles and gloves is what he had in there.
I mean, that just is the most logical thing. And who's to say he wasn't wearing like some long thermal underwear under his clothes too? Like, we just really don't know.
Yeah, and I mean, you and I both have lived in the area. When people talk about, oh, it was so freezing cold and he would have died, that's not true. I mean,
It wasn't as bad as they make it out to be.
no. I mean, yeah, a rainy day in November in Clark or Cowlitz County. Yeah, it's cold and miserable, but you'll be fine. What was it, like 40 degrees when you jumped that night? It
Yeah,
wasn't.
and I was just out and about. We just had a major snowstorm. Like, I mean, it's over now and everything's somewhat melted. But I was out the other day having dinner with my wife, and I wasn't even wearing a coat. Like, and it was like 44 degrees, and I'm like, man, it feels kind of warm today. So when you're from the Northwest, that kind of weather is pretty normal. You're not going to be too concerned about it. But I can tell, like, if somebody comes up from California, they're going to want their winter coat.
Oh yeah, definitely. And the it was there was a storm out. No, it was raining. And if
Yeah,
you live in that area, raining means that water is falling from the sky.
that's all it is.
It's not a storm.
Yeah,
It was raining. It's always raining. That doesn't mean a storm. Uh, Other places, I mean, like Idaho or Colorado, for example, other places I lived, it doesn't rain. When it does rain, it's a storm. But in Vancouver, it just rains
yeah,
every
it's just a
day.
drizzle. Yeah,
Just a
you don't
drizzle.
even think about it. You don't. It's just it is what it is. It's just part of life here. And I often think about the same thing about Dwayne Ingram and his family having that river day, which I believe was in a cold month as well.
February.
Yeah, and people are like, "Well, he was out at the river having a day," and it was like, "Well, you don't realize February is pretty cold. They weren't out having a swim. They might be spending the day at the river, but they were probably bundled up pretty warm."
Oh yeah, and I've done the same thing. I lived in Woodland. I used to go to the bottoms all the time there, and you would go in February. It would be freezing cold. You're not going to take your shoes off and go wade in the water. But I mean, when you live there, you don't have a choice. It's going to rain anyways, so you might as well go outside.
Yeah, right.
All right, Rob, what have we not covered yet?
Gosh, I don't know, man. Do you have a favorite scene, or was there something in the script we were like, well, that didn't happen. Why did he write that? That's what I'm curious about.
I don't ask why did you write that. The only thing it's you developed the relationship between Cooper and Tina, and that I really liked because I'm reading parts of the conversation like there's no evidence this happened. I mean,
Sure.
it could have definitely.
Honestly, that relationship is still developing in the script, and it's actually the biggest feedback that I've received from professional reviewers on the blacklist. Is we want to know more about Dan Cooper. We want to know more about Tina. And in the struggle for me as a writer and an entertainer is that's the one black hole that isn't really documented. So that's where a lot of the conjecture comes from. What did those two talk about? What was Tina trying to get out of Dan? I assume, and it's kind of how I portray her, is that she was kind of like a little mini detective, prodding and poking and keeping calm and trying to learn, taking notice of what he's wearing and the cigarette stains on his fingers. So that's I just try to think logically about if I was in that situation or if my wife was in that situation, what and how would they act? What kind of information would they need or try to get from Dan Cooper? And you just go with that.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, the one question that everyone knows she asks is, "Do you have a grudge against our airline?"
Yeah.
And I agree. She was trying to figure out who this guy was because she knew she was going to have to answer for it.
And she was being playful too, like she opens it up initially cracking a joke saying, well, the airline has strict policies about going to Cuba. You're not going to be able to bring home any drink or cigars, it's just against policy. And I think she's trying to comfort him and put him at ease and also get information.
Yeah, that's interesting. It would be hard to. I guess I didn't think about it that way. People telling you they want to know more about Dan Cooper when there isn't anything
They
more to
do.
say about him.
Yeah. And that's, like I said, the biggest critique is they want to know what happened to him. And it's like, well, you know as much as I do about what happened after. Like,
Right.
and you know
I've
what?
read 45 books on this, but you know as much as me.
I tried to answer what happened to Dan Cooper in my first draft. And I wrote lengthy scenes about him parachuting and landing and burying the money and burning the briefcase. And there's just no evidence of any of it. And I just thought, you know what? It's better to leave it as a mystery because no matter what I come up with, it's probably not going to be real or realistic. And it's just not what really happened. And the mystery is greater than making up an answer. So I leave it open ended. What happened to him? You tell me.
I was going to bring that up. I loved that in the. I guess it's your third version that I got the second time.
Yeah, it's the third. I call it the third draft because the first draft was the kitchen sink. I just threw everything in it. The second draft was more of a polish and a few revisions. And then the third draft is where I really went in like a surgeon and started building a unique and interesting relationship between the dialogue with Dan and Tina.
But the way it ends in your latest version, you let me read, is the way it really ends. We
Yeah,
don't know. That's
we
it.
don't know.
And I do think that's a better ending, unless I mean, yeah, that's the ending I want. I mean, you could come up with he lands and he was able to dig a hole, put the parachute and the briefcase in it, burn it, throw some dirt on top of it, and
Yep.
get out of there. But
And then the Duke boys pull up in the General Lee and he hops across the hood and jumps in and they take it off down the highway.
yeah, I thought it was weird when they started racing Ecto One. But
Anyway, so I just thought it was better to leave it as the mystery because that's where we're at today. Like it leaves us where we're at today, and it tells you all the information that's really out there, and now it's up to us to piece it together. And I hope this movie gets made because it's really important. It really changed the airline industry for the better, and obviously we continue to feel its lasting effects today with airline security and all that. And I think Tina in that Rolling Stone article even says that instance was so important for history that that it will forever be remembered as the instigating instance that led up to the attack of 9/11. You know what I mean? Like it was that first act of air piracy that was really successful, and it was the model to which every air criminal since has kind of tried to own up to. Dan, of course, the only person ever to get away with it.
yeah, it is wild back then. You could just no identification and walk on the plane with a bomb.
I did research because I was curious when metal detectors first became a thing. And my understanding and what I've read is that there was the first one kind of showed up in and around Southern California, San Diego maybe, and it wasn't a law or a regulation that it had to be there. They just put it in, and it just, obviously it needed to be everywhere.
Yeah, I had Brendan Kerner on the show, and he said there were times where you could just walk onto the plane and pay for your ticket when you were already on there.
Yeah,
Like
amazing.
that's how chillax they were about security back then. Just walk onto the plane. Oh, you don't have a ticket? Oh, it's $24.
Well, you're wearing a suit. You must obviously be a gentleman.
I like that math. All right, Rob. If people want to see what you got going on, if they want to check out the Northwest Escape experience, if they want to tell you that you don't know anything, if they want to tell you got
Absolutely.
everything right, where can they do that?
Well, you could always reach me on Twitter and Facebook. Twitter, it's at Rob Bertrand, RO Bertrand 77. And then just hit me up on Facebook, just Rob Bertrand. And then you can go to northwestescapeexperience.com, nwescapeexperience.com, to book an in person escape room and play the Operation DB Cooper room. Or you can book it as a virtual experience and play with your friends and family from all over the world from the comfort of your own home. You can just, again, reach us on our website. And I hope you do. Like, I really hope all DB Cooper enthusiasts at some point play this game, because it's not going to be around forever. We're starting now to. It's been open for like 4 years, and it's not going to last forever. So play it while you can.
Yeah, and how many DB Cooper themed experiences are there? One where the guy actually knows the case and put a bunch of Easter eggs in there for you.
I did discover one other DB Cooper room. I don't know if it's still open, but it was in Idaho of all places.
Really?
Yeah, and a funny story. I was on my way back from Idaho, and my wife and I stopped at a gas station to fuel up and to use restroom and all that. And we meet this couple, and they're like, "Hey, I see your hoodie there," because it has our logo on it. We started talking, and it turns out they owned the other DB Cooper escape room. So it's chance meeting on the highways, serendipity,
Wow.
synchronicity, I guess.
How did I not know there was a DB Cooper themed escape room in Idaho? In like
Very good question.
Boise area?
I'm not exactly sure where. I looked them up way back in the day, so I could have told you then, but now I'm not so sure. But and
Well,
it's
thanks
quite
a
possible
lot,
that
Rob.
it might not even be open anymore. I'm not exactly sure, but if it is, go play it because I'm sure it's fun, and I'm a big advocate of supporting local escape rooms. So
Well, I'm a big advocate of supporting you because you're into this case as much as me. And reading that script, I told my wife, I want to see this movie so bad. And also, I was a little bit jealous that you wrote it too. Because
well,
whenever
touche,
anyone else
Mister.
has a DB Cooper project, I'm like, why wasn't that me? That should have been me.
Well, the feeling's mutual, buddy, because I don't know if I think I told you this before. Back before I met you, I was working on a podcast, and I really wanted to do a DB Cooper podcast. And then you popped up, and I listened to it, and I'm like, well, there it goes. I can't do it now because it's already been done, and it's been done great. So I just moved on to my next project, and so in a roundabout way, dude, you're responsible for this.
Okay, well then I take full credit. I expect top billing, so I should be above your name.
Oh, one last thing, and I don't know if you picked up on this in the new draft or not. I was absolutely flabbergastedly amazed that the name Tina actually means river.
Tina means river.
Yes, the actual meaning of the name, Christina. The full version obviously is a Christian name and has a different meaning, but the shortened version, the name Tina, is an old English word for river. And the fact that the money was found at Tina Bar by a river, to me, was very fascinating. It's one of those interesting synchronicities of the story. And so I put a little bit of that in the script because I just thought it was too interesting not to include it.
I mean, all the coincidences in this case. The Dan Cooper, the Tina Bar. How many things can be a coincidence before it's not?
I don't know. It could be one of those instances of reading into things or signs that aren't really connected, but it sure is interesting and it makes for a good story.
It sure does, and I hope I'm watching this movie in the theater in no time.
Well, the time has never been better, man. If you are a movie producer and you want to capitalize on the 50th anniversary, The time is now to strike. Let's do it.
Hell yeah. Rob, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure, man. I've been looking forward to this all week, and big fan of your podcast, dude. Keep up the great work. You're blazing some incredible trails here, and I'm very proud of you, buddy.
I'm proud of you too, Rob. If you were listening to the show, I know you would get a kick out of his Operation DB Cooper escape room. He's just as big a fan of the case as I am, and it shows. Like we said, there are a ton of Easter eggs in there for true fans of the case, which, if you're willing to listen to me talk about it, you must be. If you're in the Portland-Vancouver area, Northwest Escape Experience is just off Highway 99 on 78th Street, or if you're 1,000 miles away like me, you can do it virtually like I did, with friends and family from anywhere in the world. Visit Northwest, that's nwescapeexperience.com for all the info. You'll find links to it all in the show notes. Also, if you talk to Hollywood, let them know you want them to start making this movie right away. Are you DB Cooper? Do you know who he was? Did we get something wrong? Are we doing great? Let us know. You can find us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, or email us, dbcooperpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you to Rob Bertrand for hooking me and my family up with a great time during a boring pandemic. Thank you to Russell Colbert for hooking me up with years of his labor for free. I'm Darren Schaefer, and thank you for listening to the Cooper Vortex.